Welcome to r/Reddit Revenge. This is a story of someone getting back at someone with revenge after being wronged. Thank you friends for subscribing to the channel and for so many likes. The first story, landlords blackmailed us out of $1,800 by threatening to torpedo our mortgage closure if we didn't pay up for non-existent damages. The second story, a neighbor sold the house to his neighbor after long conflict. On to the first story. Landlord gets $1,800 blackmail by threatening to torpedo mortgage closing. Winds up costing them half of their rental properties. I rented the bottom floor of a 3-floor house for 3 years. Paid the rent on time, and other than a few times something needed repaired, we pretty much left each other alone. Got a dog and a fiance during that time that both started living there. Documented everything through emails. They were very reasonable about the increases. No problems. Cut to about 5 months before the end of the 3rd year of the lease. We're getting married in about 6 months and decide it would make more financial sense to buy a starter house. We actually have a conversation with them to let them know we were thinking about not renewing the lease and why. An important note, the landlords were a husband and wife reality team that dabbled equally in rental ownership and being real estate agents, with the seal of the National Association of Realtors prominently displayed on every page on their website. They didn't seem especially bothered by it, but were very interested in being our real estate agents. We said we'd consider it. We wind up going with a personal family friend and finding a house that was what we were looking for, in a price range we can afford. Put in an offer, some back and forth, and they accept, and we start the closing process. So we give 60 days notice to our landlords, as required by the lease, down to the letter of the contract. They completely lose it. I'll skip over several weeks of drama and threats to the ultimate throwdown. They sue me, as they hadn't actually ever added my fiance to the lease, important point for later, for damages to the apartment before we had even moved out. Why? Because as they gloated several times, as real estate agents, they knew we couldn't close on a mortgage with an active lawsuit against me, even if it was completely frivolous, and gleefully pointed out they could easily drag out the appeals for years. After talking to a lawyer who very kindly gave us a consultation at a much reduced rate, thanks to us being referred to him from the local bar association, essentially confirmed that what they were doing was super unethical, but not strictly illegal, and would be very easy for them to follow through with, even if the lawsuit was completely frivolous. In the end, we paid them $1,800 in blackmail, and I had to sign a confidentiality agreement, but we were able to close on the house. Now to the revenge part, some important notes. I'm an engineer who routinely works with municipal agencies, including the code enforcement departments, so I'm pretty familiar with codes and how the system works. The county law where I lived required that all rental properties be registered with the local township for tax purposes and issued a certificate of occupancy, which requires a code inspection before it can be rented out. As most of the homes in the area are 50 to 100 years old, landlords routinely ignored these regulations, as the code enforcement officers are usually too busy with buildings that are actively falling down to enforce them. So after a few months of planning, I put my plan into action. Looking at the property records in that county, conveniently all online for free, I was able to compile a list of 15 rental properties they owned in the county, except the one we lived in, due to the NDA. A quick weekend drive to take a few pictures of each one, and a letter was compiled. A concerned citizen, aka my fiance, had looked at a rental property, but was concerned that cracks in the basement foundation, good luck finding a house that age without them, might be structural, unlikely but possible, and wanted to make sure they had been inspected for safety before the certificate of occupancy had been issued. Extremely unlikely that one had ever been applied for, given our landlords. A copy of the letter for each property went to the code enforcement officer, tax official, and township council for each township, for every property they owned. Condensing for space, she received several phone calls over the next few months from most of the township's officials. She stuck to the same script of being a potential renter and wanting to make sure the houses were inspected. Not one of the ones she received a call back about had been registered or inspected, and since all of this was now documented in their books, they were going to enforce the regulations. I don't have the actual numbers, but I imagine costs of upgrading one 100-year-old house to the current rental code, much less 15, must be in the tens of thousands, not even considering the fees and penalties for not paying the correct, higher taxes for years. Surprisingly, we never heard anything from our former landlords. Though I like to think that after the mountain of government hurt landed on them, they got a lawyer smart enough to tell them to stop poking the angry bear. I just ran a search in the property records for them again, and it seems they're now down to 8 rental properties in that county. It looks like a majority were sold within a year of us moving out, several at a loss. So assuming we were the cause, it looks like $1,800 in blackmail cost them over $30,000, just in the sale of those properties at a loss. and almost half their rental income, not even considering the price of getting their other properties up to code. The icing on the cake? I CC'd my fiancé on a lengthy email chain from their business emails, in which they conducted themselves in a completely unprofessional manner and admitted to some extremely unethical, though not illegal practices, such as admitting the lawsuit was completely frivolous, but it didn't matter because I'd pay up if I ever wanted to get a mortgage. They were stupid enough to reply back to all. So a copy of that entire email exchange was forwarded by my fiancé to the ethics officer and president of the local chapter of the National Association of Realtors they were members of, as well as the national ethics officer, using the links to each organization they so helpfully had on their website. Got follow-ups from both, asking if she wanted to file an official complaint. However, she explained that due to the confidentiality agreement, we didn't think we could file an official complaint without getting into shaky legal ground. But we wanted them to know what kind of people were using their organization's name and reputation. They said it was definitely something they would look into, but we never heard anything back. When I went to their website tonight, all the National Association of Realtors references had been removed, and according to the membership list on the website, they're no longer members of the local chapter. I like to think we had a hand in that. Since my fiancée was never officially added to the lease, they couldn't sue her, and hence couldn't make her sign the settlement. On the email, it was definitely unethical, but probably didn't meet the legal requirement for blackmail, even if it obviously was. The email was pretty D, and speaking with the ethics officers, it seemed like the understanding was that they would be given a chance to voluntarily leave the organization before the investigation started, and if they did, they would drop the matter. Seeing as how that gave us some satisfaction without spending years in court, we went with that option, and based on the results, I'm assuming they did too. The second story is the long game. To set the stage, many decades ago, Barney and Betty immigrated from Europe and bought a farm. A few years later, they had kids and sponsored Wilma from the old country as a nanny. She met Fred, a local boy, fell in love and got married. Wilma stayed on as the nanny, and Fred worked as a farmhand. Their kids and Barney and Betty's kids grew up together, and it was pretty much a big blended family. Years go by, and Barney and Betty decide to sell the farm fields to Farmer Frank, but kept the land the house was on. They made enough off the sale to build a nice new house and rezone the property lines. They broke the lot up into two parcels, one for the new house and one for the existing house, which they gifted to Fred and Wilma as a recognition of their years of dedicated and loving service. Both houses shared a well and a septic field. More time went by. Barney and Betty passed away, and their house was inherited by their son Bam Bam. Fred also passed away, and Wilma stayed in the house. She was an angel. Everyone in the town knew and loved her. She was like the town's grandmother. She was active in the church, and liked nothing more than crocheting booties for anyone in town that had a baby. Sadly, Wilma passed away too, and her house was inherited by her daughter Pebbles. She was well established in a nearby metropolitan city, and made the decision to sell the house. And so, it begins. To give you a better idea of the setup, the parcel for sale is the yellow bit, which backs onto protected park land and is bordered by Bam Bam's land and Farmer Frank's fields. It was purchased by a builder from the city, which we'll call Dick. The name suits him. He wanted it as a country getaway, as he already had a place in the city. He got approval to improve the place, and his plans were to convert the barn into a multi-car garage with a man cave and an apartment in what was the loft. He started by tearing down the house, with plans to replace it with a bigger, more modern house. The house was torn down, and the new build was started. The lower part of the yellow represents a very narrow driveway. Between that driveway and Farmer Frank's field was a drainage culvert. So the contractors started parking their vehicles on Bam Bam's lot. Bam Bam asked the contractors not to do it, but they didn't stop, so he approached Dick, and the conversation didn't go well. Dick was an entitled big shot, dealing with what he thought was a country bumpkin. To give you an idea, Dick once went to the local diner and asked for the wine list. He was aggressive and disrespectful, and this pretty much set the tone for all future interactions. Bam Bam had enough. These contractor trucks were tearing up his ground, so one weekend he built a fence along the border between his house and Dick's. It wasn't a complicated fence. He just got a buddy with a post hole digger on his Bobcat, sunk posts and strung planks between them. This caused no end of trouble with the build. There was no room to park in the yellow for the contractors without getting in each other's way, and they couldn't park in the driveway, which was only wide enough for one vehicle at a time. Contractors were peeved off. They had a long walk from the road to the build site and had to carry tools and equipment back and forth. Either that or take turns dropping materials, waiting hours for the carpenters to finish unloading the lumber, so that the plumbers could unload the pipes. Dick was furious and came stomping over to Bam Bam, demanding that he dismantle the fence. Bam Bam told him to go to heck. Then a day later, Bam Bam saw that someone had removed some of the fence, and the contractor trucks were back on his land. Okay, thought Bam Bam, let's play. The following weekend, Bam Bam irrigated the area where the contractors were parking. Irrigated it long and continuously. He probably had to get a water delivery to make it happen, as the well had a limited capacity. On Monday, the first contractor to arrive turned off Dick's driveway to go through the fence and immediately sank up to his axles in mud. Did I mention that Bam Bam owned the local service station and knew every tow truck company within 100 miles? As it turned out, everyone they called was too busy to pull the truck out, and they had to call a tow truck from the city, almost 2 hours away. You can see how the relationship between Bam Bam and Dick became somewhat less than neighborly. Time went by, and Dick's house was completed. It was a low-maintenance setup, with interlocking brick over the compound, tall hedges separating Dick from Bam Bam. They kept out of each other's way, but they certainly weren't pals. Dick's kids would come up on the weekend and have a party now and then, but Bam Bam put up with it. One issue that arose was when Dick decided to fill the small swimming pool that he had installed. This drew the well dry and caused some sand to be pulled into the water treatment equipment. When Bam Bam approached Dick about the cost of the repair via email, Dick basically replied that it was Bam Bam's problem. The same when the septic holding tank needed to be pumped. Bam Bam offered to split the cost of the pumping, and Dick refused to part with a dime. Years passed, and Dick decided to list the house for sale. That's when Bam Bam made his move. He cut the water and capped the septic line leading from Dick's house. Then he informed the real estate agent of what he had done. Well, that induced a thunderstorm for sure. There's no way Dick could sell a house that had no water or any way to dispose of waste. He couldn't build a septic field on his property. It was too small. He approached Farmer Frank to buy some of his land, but was rebuffed. His only option would have been to install a septic holding tank, but the only place to put it would have been right in the middle of his compound, and septic tanks can be aromatic. It would also have meant removing the in-ground pool. Dick tried to argue in court that he was entitled to access the well water and the septic field, but Bam Bam won, arguing that the Wilma and Fred were given water and septic as a courtesy, and that there was no contractual obligation to provide Dick either well water or septic access. There was nothing in the deed to Wilma and Fred that could be grandfathered in, and Dick's emails refusing to pay for maintenance to either system was the nail in the coffin. The property sat vacant and unusable for months. The price dropped through the floor, and the few people that expressed an interest in the property approached Bam Bam with varying offers of cash to restore service. Bam Bam declined. No offers were made to Dick for the house. Finally, Dick did receive an offer from a numbered corporation, an offer that was about a quarter of the asking price. As is with a statement that the buyer was aware that there was no water or septic service to the property. Without much choice, Dick accepted the offer. And that's how Bam Bam bought himself a beautiful modern country home at a steal of a price. He reattached the water and septic in an afternoon and moved his furniture down the driveway. He rented his old house out for extra money and had the numbered company negotiate with himself for an arrangement for perpetual use of the well and septic, thereby jacking the value of the house by a factor of 4. Later, if he decides to sell, he'll be making a massive profit. Bam Bam now enjoys a country paradise and is the social king of the hill in his town, all because Dick decided to be a D. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel to know when the new video comes out.